So our presentation group is presenting on prisoner reentry in Maryland. I'm Jason, and I'm going to go over a brief overview of the situation in the United States and in Maryland, and go over some reentry programs that are found in Maryland. So the most recent US Census found that there were about 308 million people living in the United States in 2010. The two largest racial groups were white at about 72% and African American at about 13%. However, if you look at the US prison population demographics, of the 23 million people living in, or of the 23 million people in prison, about 33% are white and about 37% are African American. And so we see that there is a disparity between the number of people living in the United States versus how they are represented in US prisons. So some explanations for this disparity include punishment for crimes and social factors. The incarceration rate for African American men has been found to be 8 times higher than that of white men. And other studies have suggested that policing practices, police enforcement, disproportionate allocation of resources, disparate treatment in court, and lack of quality defense in court may also contribute to the increased rate of incarceration among African American men. So in Maryland, there's a similar disparity that is found in the rest of the United States. The Maryland population demographics show that there are about 28% of people living in Maryland are African American, and the proportion of African Americans living in prison was found to be about 76%. In Baltimore, the proportion of people living in Baltimore that are African American was found to be 64%, and the proportion of African Americans in jail was found to be 89%. So what might cause this disparity? In Maryland, previous studies have suggested that the rise in drug-related crimes may partially explain the incarceration disparity in Maryland. In 1975, the number of drug crimes in Maryland was about 250 per 100,000 residents, whereas in 2000, the number of drug crimes rose to about 650 per 100,000 residents. The increase in drug-related crimes may have caused increased prison incarceration for African American men because in the late 1980s, the federal government enacted drug policies known as the War on Drugs, which increased the severity of penalties for drug use. These penalties, which are found in the Sentencing Reform Act of 1984, were found to disproportionately affect people of color. And one study found that 84.5% of individuals convicted for possession of cocaine were African American, despite the fact that 66% of individuals who used cocaine were actually white or Latino. So some of the prisoner reentry programs found in Maryland include programs in education and employment readiness, substance abuse, and comprehensive pre-release programming initiatives. In terms of education and employment readiness programs, one study found that among Maryland prison inmates, the average reading level was between 6th and 8th grade. Less than half had graduated from high school or passed a GED, and most were jobless at the time that they were arrested. And so the Maryland Division of Correction implemented an education and employment readiness program that works toward educating prisoners, improving job skills, and providing work experience. And prisoners are eligible for this program if they have a minimum of an 18-month sentence and they do not possess a high school degree or GED. And the program allows the prison inmates to attend school for about 12 hours per week. A substance abuse program in Maryland is called the Residential Substance Abuse Treatment Program, and it's also run by the Maryland Department of Correction. Eligible prisoners are those that have identified as having a history of substance abuse problems, and the Residence Substance Abuse Treatment Program provides prisoners with 6 months of residential treatment at the Central Laundry Facility or the Maryland Correctional Institute for Women. And once the prisoners complete the 6-month program, they undergo further treatment with community-based outpatient centers. And there's also reentry programs known as comprehensive pre-release programming initiatives, and two that are found in Maryland include the Partnerships for Reentry Programming and the Maryland Reentry Program. These programs basically help prisoners transition from living in prisons to returning to small communities in Baltimore. They offer substance abuse treatment, family counseling, and behavioral skills development. And Andrew will go more into detail about the Maryland Reentry Program.
So, as we aim to consider not only the health and well-being of inmates, but also the health and well-being of the communities to which inmates return after serving their sentences, it's important to consider the actual programming that's available in Maryland and specifically Baltimore detention centers that aim to successfully rehabilitate inmates. Inmates generally experience a higher prevalence of both mental illness and also chronic and infectious diseases than the general population. And this is intimately tied to their chances of a successful reentry. For example, untreated chronic or mental illnesses can serve as a barrier to an inmate's ability to find work upon reentry. And infectious diseases can pose a health risk for the communities to which inmates return. One of the major issues concerning healthcare in the inmate population is whether or not there's continuity of care between the services that they may receive in prison and their actual ability to receive adequate health care upon reentry. And that can, similar to many others in the general population, that can depend on an inmate's ability to find work or apply for assistance programs. And because of that, educational and vocational training opportunities in prisons can actually have an indirect role on the health of inmates and communities after reentry. So in 2001, 31% of inmates in Maryland did not participate in any programming or work, and that reflects on the inability of the system to adequately provide these services to inmates. Despite an expressed and documented need, less than one half of Maryland inmates had their high school diplomas or GEDs at the time of their arrest, and more than half of them were unemployed. And I think a good example is a program that Jason was referring to, that's a mandatory program for all those serving sentences greater than 18 months who did not have a diploma or GED. And despite the fact that this program is in fact mandatory, a large portion of inmates never actually enrolled in any of the programming due to teacher shortages that limited the program size. And we see this trend in teacher shortages continuing. From 1990 to 2000, the inmate population grew by 54%, but the number of teachers or correctional educators only increased by 4%. So by 2001, 1,500 inmates were on waiting lists for educational or vocational programs, and that's Maryland's data. Substance abuse is obviously a large issue among the inmate population. It's a major contributor to criminal activity, and it can also pose an obstacle, if untreated, it can pose an obstacle to successful reentry. It can interfere with to an inmate's ability to find work upon their release, and increase their risk of reoffending ultimately. And Maryland offers several substance abuse programs, but the main concern with these programs is that they're currently only serving a minority of the inmate population. So one of the major concerns with both healthcare and some of this prison programming is the continuity of care. And a program that shows promise in this area is the Maryland Reentry Partnership Initiative, which Jason mentioned. And it's specifically designed to not only provide services to inmates within prison, substance abuse treatment, family counseling, behavioral skills development, but also to use a case management team to help provide services to inmates upon their release. So this program is promising, but also limited in scale. It provides services to a very small percentage of the Baltimore inmate population, and like so many other things, that's severely limited by budget constraints.